They said the man who built an empire feeding millions couldn't even fix one failing diner. They whispered that Troy Whitaker had lost his edge, that money in boardrooms had dulled the fire in his gut. But what they didn't know was that he just slipped into a beat-up Ford truck, wearing second-hand flannel, heading straight into the heart of East Detroit, Undercover. And what he found, a folded note slipped beneath a chipped ceramic mug. A waitress too brave for her own good, and a secret that could unravel everything he'd spent 20 years building. Who do you become when the people you trusted are the ones robbing you blind? And what would you risk to protect someone you've never met, but who sees you clearer than your own reflection? Before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. Would you risk your fortune to save stranger? The cold light of morning filtered through the floor-to-ceiling glass of Troy Whitaker's Belle Isle penthouse, falling in long streaks across the sleek granite counters and spotless wood floors. But Troy didn't see the view, didn't care that Lake St. Clair shimmered like silver beyond the glass. His eyes were fixed on the quarterly report in his hands, and the numbers printed in angry red. East Grand Diner, down 27%. Complaints up. Employee retention in free fall. He sat there in silence, suit jacket draped over the leather chair behind him, a fresh pour of Guatemalan roast cooling beside untouched eggs. His thumb hovered over the stack of comments he'd marked the night before. Cold food. Manager yelled in front of customers. Asked for a refund, got called names. It wasn't just business failure. It was personal. That diner was supposed to honor his father, a Vietnam vet who used to run Sunday breakfast for the whole block from their garage grill. That was where this empire started. He had built restaurants across 20 states, fusion spots in L.A., 5 stars in Manhattan, even a food truck arm in Austin. But this one diner, his heart project, was bleeding out in his own city. And the men running it? Handpicked, trusted. So how had it come to this? His phone buzzed. A reminder about the black tie gala downtown. Donors. Smiles. Fake laughter. He swiped it away. In the mirrored panel behind the kitchen, he caught his own reflection. Crisp Oxford shirt, tired eyes. When was the last time, he muttered, I walked into one of my places not as the owner, but as a customer? Outside, the early frost clung to car roofs. His driver texted he was downstairs. Instead, Troy crossed the room, opened a drawer, and pulled out an old college sweatshirt. Faded navy. Northwestern. He hadn't worn it in a decade. He changed, slipped on boots, and grabbed a plain baseball cap. He wasn't going to East Grand as Troy Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Hospitality. Today, he'd just be some guy looking for a cup of coffee. And maybe, just maybe, some answers. The scent of frying bacon drifted through the narrow apartment like a promise. Naomi Green stood barefoot in the tiny kitchen, flipping pancakes on a chipped skillet, while Lila, 7 years old and curious-eyed, sat at the wobbly dining table coloring a picture of a house with purple shutters and a garden full of sunflowers. Mama, she said, lifting her crayon mid-stroke. When are we going to have a backyard like that? Naomi smiled without turning. Soon, baby. One day soon. She said it like a prayer. Like if she said it enough times, it might come true. The truth sat folded in an envelope by the toaster. A month's worth of tips, 32 hours of split shifts, late nights, and coal bus rides. $294 and some coins. Not enough for the deposit she needed. Not enough for the field trip Lila had begged to go on. But she told herself it was progress. The floor creaked under her bare heel as she crossed the kitchen and knelt beside her daughter, wiping syrup from her chin with the cuff of her thrifted flannel shirt. Tell me about this house of yours, Naomi said softly. Lila's eyes lit up. It's got a big kitchen, so you don't bump into things when you're cooking. And there's a room just for me, with stars on the ceiling and a swing set and a mailbox that only I have the key to. Naomi kissed her forehead, her voice catching as she whispered, Sounds perfect, sweetheart. After Lila's father left, disappeared like smoke when diapers and bills became too real, Naomi had made a choice, survive or sink. She chose to fight, and she hadn't stopped since. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Edna upstairs. Happy to walk Lila to school again today. That child's got sunshine in her bones. Naomi texted back a heart emoji, then turned to her daughter. Mrs. Edna's picking you up today. Be good, listen close, and remember the rule. Lila nodded like a soldier. Be kind. Work hard. Never let anyone make me feel small. That's my girl. She helped her into her coat, brushing out her curls with gentle fingers, and pulled the scarf around her neck like she was wrapping up something fragile and precious. On the wall, a faded photo of Naomi's father, in his transit uniform, smile crooked but proud, watched over them. She whispered to it sometimes, especially on mornings like this. At the bus stop, Lila reached for her mother's hand. Are you okay, Mama? Naomi hesitated. The air was colder than it should have been. Frostbit at her cheeks. She smiled through it. I'm just thinking about how proud I am of you. But her heart was pounding. The diner, that place was changing. Tips had been light the last few weeks. Kevin, the district manager, had started showing up more often, watching too closely. Staff who asked the wrong questions were suddenly missing from the schedule. And last week, her paycheck came short again. When she asked about it, Kevin had cornered her by the freezer. His voice low, his breath laced with whiskey and warning. Single moms in your situation, he'd said, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and old grease. A soundtrack of clinking dishes and quiet murmurs playing beneath it all. He paused at the entrance just long enough to draw glances. Just another tired man in flannel and jeans, maybe on break from some warehouse shift down the street. He picked the counter seat farthest from the kitchen, close enough to observe but out of reach of the mirrors. The laminated menu was sticky at the edges. He didn't open it. He already knew what this place used to serve, knew how the pancakes were supposed to look, how the coffee was supposed to taste. But this wasn't a nostalgia trip. It was a test. Naomi spotted him just as she was refilling Table 4's orange juice. For a heartbeat, she froze, tray in hand, pitcher halfway, tilted, something in her gut twisting. That face. She'd seen it before. Not in person. On plaques. On websites. Behind podiums on the local news. She blinked once fast, then kept walking, steady now. She didn't let on that she recognized him. But when she reached the counter, she poured his coffee slow, hand trembling just enough to cause a ripple. Black? She asked, her voice soft. Troy nodded. Black. She placed the cup in front of him, wiped her hands on her apron, and walked away. But under the edge of the saucer, half-tucked and almost invisible, he watched her move through the room, graceful in her fatigue, every step practiced to avoid spills, insults, and glances that lingered too long. She smiled at a toddler in a booster seat. She dodged Kevin's glare from the manager's booth. She kept her head down. When the time felt right, Troy slid the saucer toward him, pretending to adjust it. His fingers found the edge of the paper. He palmed it, slipped it into his coat without unfolding. And then he waited. Naomi never looked back. Not once. But she didn't have to. She knew he'd read it. She knew tonight would change everything. The diner lights buzzed faintly as Troy stepped out into the bitter evening air, the door creaking shut behind him like a secret sealed. The folded paper in his pocket pressed against his chest with a weight that felt heavier than its size allowed. He waited until he was a block away, under the flickering glow of a busted street lamp, before pulling it out. The handwriting was hurried, slanted, penned by someone used to writing fast and watching their back. They're stealing from you. Cash schemes. Fake vendors. Fake repairs. I have proof. Meet me tonight. Lafayette Park. 8 p.m. Bench by the sculpture. Come alone. Troy stood still, the cold biting into his fingers. For a moment, he just stared at the words. Then he folded the paper again, slowly, deliberately, and slid it into the inner pocket of his jacket. A block away, a beat-up SUV with tinted windows idled too long at a green light. He turned down a side street. Back in his car, the warmth of the heater couldn't quite chase away the chill that had settled in his spine. He played the moment over and over, the way her hand had trembled, the way she hadn't looked back. That note could have cost her more than just her job. And yet, she had slipped it to him like someone who had nothing left to lose. He opened the diner's financials again on his phone. Vendor charges that didn't match deliveries. Appliance repairs billed 3 times. Thousands vanishing like smoke. It wasn't just mismanagement. It was a system, clean, intentional, invisible unless you knew where to look. He thought of Kevin, lounging in that back booth like he owned the place, of the staff who barely made rent, of Naomi's eyes, not fearful but determined. He had built this empire with his name on every door. And someone was using that name to bleed people dry. Troy clenched his fist. Tonight, he wasn't showing up as a CEO. He wasn't bringing security, lawyers, or press. He was going as a man who owed someone the truth. And maybe the star way out. Lafayette Park was quiet under the weight of nightfall. The city sounds muffled beneath a blanket of cold air. The sculpture, a twisted helix of rusted steel, loomed like a sentinel over the empty bench. Troy arrived early. He always did. Years of boardroom warfare had taught him the value of observing before engaging. He sat, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the shadows. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Just when he began to wonder if she'd changed her mind, a figure emerged from the path near the trees. Naomi moved like someone who'd learned not to make noise. Her coat was too thin for the weather, and the scarf around her neck frayed at the edges. She sat without a word, leaving a full foot of space between them. "I didn't expect you to come," she said quietly, without looking at him. "I didn't expect a waitress to risk everything to warn me," he replied. She pulled a small, worn notebook from her bag and handed it to him. "Vendor names, invoice numbers, dates. I've been tracking it for months. They reroute cash, order fake shipments, then mark them as repairs or spoilage. Kevin's in on it. Maybe more." Troy flipped through the pages, his breath fogging in the cold. The handwriting matched the note. Every line was tight, documented, ruthless in its clarity. "Why tell me?" he asked. Naomi stared ahead at the sculpture, voice steady. "Because this place used to mean something. Before Kevin, before they made it front. My uncle washed dishes here when it opened. Said your father used to come by every Sunday. Shake hands with the cooks. Ask about their kids." She paused. Now people are afraid to speak. Afraid to lose the only paycheck they've got. Troy exhaled slowly. "They ever threaten you?" Naomi laughed, short and bitter. "Only when I ask about my hours, or why Tina stopped getting scheduled after she found a second ledger." That landed like a stone in Troy's gut. Their eyes locked, not as CEO and employee, not as savior and victim, but as two people who knew what it meant to fight for something real. She stood to leave. "Tomorrow night. Back entrance. I'll get you inside. Cameras go down at midnight." Troy nodded. As she disappeared into the dark, notebook still in his hand, he realized this wasn't just about catching thieves. It was about reclaiming what was his, and protecting someone who still believed he could. The next evening came fast, wrapped in wind and whispers. Troy stood behind the dumpster at the rear of East Grand Diner, dressed in a faded hoodie and jeans streaked with engine grease, borrowed from his mechanic's nephew to complete the look. Midnight ticked closer. The back alley was quiet, except for the distant rumble of a freight train cutting through Detroit's spine. A soft knock, 3 quick taps, echoed from the back door. Naomi cracked it open, eyes scanning the alley before stepping aside. "You got 3 hours tops," she whispered. "Cameras looped till 3 a.m. After that, it's live again." Troy stepped inside, the door closing behind them with a metallic thud. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the glow of the freezer light and the hum of the soda machine. It smelled of bleach and burnt oil. Everything about it felt off, too clean, too quiet. Naomi led him through the prep station, into a narrow hallway that ended at an old supply closet. She reached into a loose tile and pulled out a second ledger, thicker, darker, the kind that doesn't go through accounting. "This is the real book," she said. "Cash payments. Fake vendors. One in Allen Park. A shell location. They've been moving money in and out for months," Naomi said. "RGD isn't even real. It's a cover. The address leads to a mail drop, not an office." She opened a cooler in the corner. Inside, nestled beneath bags of frozen peas, were envelopes. Stacks of cash banded tight. "They stash it here overnight before the courier picks it up. And it's happening under my roof." He reached into his pocket and handed her something. a business card with his private number scribbled across the back. "Tomorrow night, you're not coming in. I'll call you when it's done." Naomi hesitated. "If something happens to me—" "It won't," he cut in. "But if it does, I've already sent this to 3 lawyers and a reporter." For the first time, she let her shoulders fall. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the block. Naomi flinched. Troy looked toward the sound, jaw tight. "Time to finish this." The fluorescent lights in the diner flickered, casting long, nervous shadows across the cracked linoleum floor. It was nearly closing time. The booths were empty, the radio low. His shirt unbuttoned at the collar, eyes fixed on her like a predator sizing up prey. "Naomi," he called, voice too calm to be safe. "Mind stepping into the back for a second?" She hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. "You got a problem with following directions now?" he said, sharper. She forced a smile. "No, sir." The office was small, windowless, stifling, almost like you've been watching something other than tables. Naomi said nothing. He stepped closer. "See, I hear things. About you, and that guy came in the other day. Wore a flannel. Drank his coffee real slow. Didn't touch his eggs. Ring a bell." Naomi swallowed. He was just a customer. Kevin grinned, but it never touched his eyes. "You know what happens when people start poking around where they don't belong, right? Bad things. Unfortunate things." He leaned in close, especially to little girls who walk home from school alone. Naomi's breath hitched, just a flicker. But he saw it. "Let me make it simple," he said. "Whatever you think you're doing, stop." She looked him dead in the eye. "Then maybe you should stop first." He blinked, just once, then laughed low and dark, like he couldn't decide whether to be impressed or enraged. But Naomi didn't flinch. She already knew how this ended. Surrounded by crayons and paper. She looked up, grin wide. "Mr. Troy," she said, holding up a drawing. "Want to see my new dinosaur?" He crouched beside her, studying the blue stegosaurus stomping through a garden of flowers. "That's one fierce-looking dino," he said. "What's her name?" "Justice," Lila beamed. "She keeps the bad guys out of the backyard." Troy glanced toward Naomi, who stood near the kitchen, arms folded, but eyes softer than he'd ever seen them. She nodded toward the sofa. "You hungry?" "I'm good," he said. "I just wanted to check in. Before tonight." Naomi sat beside him, her voice quiet. "You sure you're ready?" "No," Troy admitted. "But I'm going anyway." She looked at him, steady. "They're not just stealing money. They're stealing people's lives. Time. Dignity. You fix this, Troy, don't just patch it." Lila climbed into her mother's lap, resting her head against her chest. "Are you going to make the bad guys go away, Mr. Troy?" He reached over, tucked one of her curls behind her ear. "That's the plan, kiddo." And in that moment, with a child's weight pressed against a mother's tired arms, he remembered why this mattered. Not for headlines, not for legacy, but for them. The clock above the fryer ticked past 11:30 p.m. The diner was dark, closed, but not empty. Troy slipped in through the back in trance, the door clicking shut behind him like the closing of a vault. His phone was clipped to his chest, camera rolling. In his pocket, a second phone streamed live to a private server. No room for second chances. From behind the storage rack, he watched. Kevin entered the kitchen, swagger in every step. He was laughing, that same arrogant chuckle Troy remembered from his days dealing with boardroom parasites. But this was dirtier, more reckless. He clapped hands with a man in a gray hoodie, face half hidden. "You got the drop?" Kevin asked. The man held up a duffel. 12 grand clean. You'll get the rest when the next invoice clears." Kevin unzipped the bag, fanned the cash with his fingers, eyes gleaming. "Nice doing business." Troy stepped forward, slow, deliberate. The phone light caught Kevin's face. "You're done," Troy said, voice low. Kevin froze. The man in the hoodie reached for his waistband, but Troy raised his voice, steady. "Smile. You're on 6 cameras, 2 mics, and a federal live stream. That's enough evidence to shut this place down and bury you with it." Kevin's mouth opened, then closed. "You're trespassing," he barked. "No," Troy said. "I own this building. And tomorrow, I'll own your confession too." From the hallway, Naomi stepped out, USB in hand. Security footage from the last 4 weeks. Every deal, every stolen cent. Kevin's face crumbled. Rage, then panic. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. Troy shook his head. "You made it first." Then the sirens wailed outside, and Justice walked through the front door. Morning broke with a quiet kind of thunder. News vans lined the curb outside East Grand Diner. Microphones pointed like weapons, cameramen elbowing for angles. Inside, the air buzzed not with the clatter of plates, but with questions, flashes, and something Naomi hadn't felt in months: hope. Troy stood at the front. No suit, no script, just him. Raw, real. Behind him, Kevin was let out in handcuffs, jacket tugged high to hide his face. The officers didn't speak. They didn't need to. The headlines would do it for them. Naomi stood just off to the side, hands shaking as she held the press release Troy had asked her to read. He gave her a small nod. She stepped up, voice firm despite the weight in her chest. As of today, East Grand Diner will be undergoing a full internal audit. All funds recovered will be used to launch a worker relief fund and a scholarship program for frontline staff. Flashes popped. Someone shouted, "Are you in charge now?" Naomi smiled, a small, knowing curve. "No, but I'll make sure whoever is never forgets who keeps the lights on." Later, as the crowd cleared, Troy turned to her. "You still want that garden?" She laughed, tired but alive. "Yeah, I do." He handed her a folded set of keys. "Then let's start digging." Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sounds like quiet steps toward the truth. If the story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know in the comments. What would you risk to protect what's right?